Erin was born on July 15, 1994, in the United States to parents who remain unidentified. Thankfully, she was adopted by Laura and William, a Tennessee couple. Altogether, they raised 7 children, 5 of whom were adopted, Erin included. To Laura and William, adoption was more than simply a choice. It represented obedience to a divine calling to assist those in need, particularly because several of their adopted children required special care. For example, their youngest child, Trisha, was born with numerous birth defects. From a very young age, while growing up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Erin demonstrated an extraordinary and unconditional affection for animals. Her mother fondly recalled that Erin was the only one capable of training a rabbit to walk on a leash like a dog. Compassionate and soft-natured, Erin benefited from being part of a close and supportive family, encountering only the typical difficulties faced by any ordinary household. When Trisha died at only 3.5 years old, Laura and William guided their grieving children to understand the value of having given her a joyful life. As time passed, Erin transformed her love for animals into a unique ability to tame horses that no one else was able to control. She owned a pony named Riley that was kept at a stable close to her home. While in 5th grade, she met Jonathan Corwin, who was 1 year older than she was. At first, they were not especially close, but roughly 5 years later, they began communicating through social media. By that point, Erin's nurturing instincts had led her to care for dozens of animals, from fish and guinea pigs to cats and dogs, all of which she took in and looked after. Eventually, Jonathan gathered the confidence to ask her out, selecting her 16th birthday as the occasion. With approval from her parents, their relationship flourished, and their romance, filled with exchanged poems and shared aspirations, made them appear like the ideal American couple. After graduating from high school, Erin secured a job at a local tractor supply store, dedicating her spare time to her horse or searching through garage sales with her mother and siblings. At the same time, Jonathan enlisted in the Marine Infantry, and confident in their promising future together, they married in Las Vegas in November 2012. The next year, Jonathan found out he would be reassigned to California. Although the idea thrilled both him and Erin, they intended to return to East Tennessee as soon as they could. In September 2013, the newly married couple relocated to their new residence at the Marine base in San Bernardino County. The area also functioned as one of the access points to Joshua Tree National Park. There, they formed new connections, including Connor and Eileen Malachy, a couple who lived on the ground floor of the same building with their young son, Brian. During everyday routines, Jonathan also developed a friendship with another fellow Marine, Christopher Brandon Lee. The son of Karen Lee and originally from Anchorage, Alaska, Christopher had been struggling after returning from a deployment in Afghanistan. He lived on the base with his wife, Nicole, and their 6-year-old daughter, Liberty. Like Erin, the couple shared a passion for horses. Before long, the 3 couples became close friends. While their husbands were working, Erin, Eileen, and Nicole would visit one another to eat lunch and talk. When Jonathan, Connor, and Christopher were home, they would cook together or watch television shows and movies in one another's apartments. It felt as though every apartment belonged to everyone. In addition, Christopher and his wife Nicole became sponsors for horses at Roca Blanca Ranch, which also housed a non-profit organization devoted to animal welfare and protection. The property was owned by Isabel Megley. Naturally, once she learned about it, Erin became involved in the cause as well. Despite their military responsibilities, life initially appeared to be running smoothly. At first, Christopher seemed well-suited to military life, but over time, other Marines observed that he frequently exhibited a combination of chaos and disrespect when handling weapons. A superior officer eventually scolded him for treating rifles and rocket launchers like playthings, which led to Christopher gaining a reputation for recklessness. For the Corwins, daily life away from both of their families introduced pressures that pushed their relationship beyond the carefree honeymoon stage. Their young age also meant they lacked full preparation for the realities of marriage, leading to frequent arguments about finances and mutual accusations of excessive spending. However, when Erin discovered she was pregnant, all tension and resentment between her and Jonathan disappeared. She was so overjoyed that she announced the news with a blue and pink post on her social media account. Sadly, only a few weeks later, Erin experienced a miscarriage, leaving her emotionally shattered. Making the situation worse, Jonathan's repeated absences due to military training exercises far from the base created additional emotional and physical separation, as she felt he could not comfort her. As a result, the fractures in their marriage not only resurfaced but grew wider. During moments of shared downtime, Christopher had been observing Erin and easily noticed the deep sorrow reflected on her face. From that point on, he began spending increased time alone with Erin, without Nicole present. On a Sunday evening in February 2014, the Lees visited the Corwins at their apartment. Jonathan and Nicole decided to watch an episode of a zombie television series, but Erin, disturbed by the violence, chose not to participate. Rather than remaining with his wife, Christopher accompanied Erin into the master bedroom to play video games. Sitting alone together on the floor, side by side, they played for several minutes until one of them paused the game and they looked at each other. Without warning, they shared their first kiss. Though it was brief, that moment of intimacy altered everything, and they began an affair that rapidly intensified. Before long, Erin and Christopher were discussing leaving their spouses and how well she would fulfill the role of stepmother to Liberty, whom she often looked after. Meanwhile, Nicole became aware of her husband's increasing detachment and eventually checked his phone, uncovering the messages exchanged between Christopher and Erin. Nicole was enraged and confronted Christopher with a tirade of venomous words that stretched on for hours. She did not stop at that, however. She also notified Jonathan about the affair, triggering an explosive confrontation that continued throughout the night. When Erin attempted to leave, Nicole, her eyes burning with fury, shouted threats in her direction. Erin and Christopher put an end to their affair, but after several weeks, they resumed meeting in secret. Around this period, Christopher composed a poem for Erin, encouraging her not to lose hope. At the same time, unaware that the betrayal was still ongoing, Jonathan was resolved to save his marriage. Then, on June 22, 2014, while Erin was nervously anticipating her mother's first visit to California, she realized she was pregnant once more, this time unquestionably carrying Christopher's child. Although she did not make the announcement on social media, she told him. At first, Christopher pretended to be happy, but in truth he was displeased, fearing the news might interfere with his plans. Despite making promises of a shared future to Erin, Christopher never intended to leave his wife and was deeply afraid of how Nicole might react to the pregnancy. His time in the Marines was approaching its conclusion. On July 4, 2014, he was scheduled to complete his service and then prepare to return to Alaska with his wife, leaving the turbulent affair behind. The following day, Christopher told Isabel that he had been exploring the desert and was excited about the unusual things he had discovered, especially a difficult-to-access mine shaft. He then asked to borrow a white propane tank she owned. Isabel raised no objections. Meanwhile, he began searching online for information on how to dispose of a body. After that, he messaged Erin, inviting her to a surprise romantic evening in the national park. Filled with excitement, Erin immediately texted a friend in Tennessee to share the news. Together, they speculated about her lover's true intentions and the reference to a surprise. When her friend replied with a ring emoji, Erin admitted she was thrilled by the possibility of a marriage proposal. The date was scheduled for June 28th. Christopher told his wife that he had arranged a coyote hunting trip in Joshua Tree National Park with Connor, which conveniently allowed him to bring along his Winchester .22 caliber rifle. Early that morning, he also loaded the propane tank and gasoline. Before departing, he told Nicole that Connor had canceled, so he would go alone. At around 7:30 that morning, Erin told Jonathan she was going to Joshua Tree National Park to explore trails that she and her mother might later bike along. She kissed him goodbye and told him she loved him, leading her husband to believe their life was returning to normal. Upon arriving at the meeting point, Erin was met with a brutal awakening. Not only was there no dream proposal, but Christopher also made it clear that he felt no affection for her at all. She was faced with a man consumed by rage, with her as the focus of his fury. What followed is largely known only to him. However, it is known that he fired shots into the air before using a rope attached to 2 reinforcement bars to strangle Erin, cutting off her supply of air. After she collapsed to the ground, he checked her vital signs and, once he was certain she was no longer breathing, threw her into the mine shaft he had discovered days earlier. Erin fell 76 meters downward. As hours passed without any word from his wife, Jonathan grew increasingly anxious. He attempted to call her at least 50 times and eventually reported her missing the following morning, when the young soldier also contacted his mother-in-law. She suspected that her daughter, who had always struggled with directions, might have become lost in the vast national park. Several days went by with no information regarding Erin's whereabouts. When new details finally surfaced, they were anything but comforting. A woman living in a remote area noticed that a car had been parked near her home for several days, which was highly unusual. She photographed the vehicle and shared the images, hoping the owner would come forward. These photographs proved to be critical, as it was discovered that the car belonged to Erin. When the police informed Erin's family that her car had been found abandoned several kilometers north of the park, her mother felt a sharp pain in her heart. To her, it was nearly a certain indication that her daughter had encountered something evil. The police felt the same way. From that moment, the authorities were faced with 2 objectives, one more difficult than the other. The first objective was to collect evidence to prosecute a possible attacker. In pursuit of this, detectives in San Bernardino began examining Erin's life and soon uncovered concealed aspects that may have placed her in danger. Through this investigation, Jonathan learned that his wife's affair had continued secretly. This revelation quickly caused the police to eliminate the husband as a suspect. Instead, Christopher became the primary focus of their inquiry, especially after tire tracks discovered near Erin's car appeared to match his vehicle. As a result, on July 1, 2014, Christopher was questioned by police. By that time, he had concealed his rifle at Isabel's ranch. Christopher initially apologized for failing to disclose his relationship with Erin, insisting that their interactions had never crossed the limits imposed by their respective marriages. Then, unexpectedly, he claimed that Erin had confided in him about being a victim of domestic abuse. Regarding the Saturday she vanished, he admitted that he had been alone in the national park area, supposedly hunting coyotes, which explained why he fired his weapon at rocks. However, when police confronted him with the evidence, Christopher altered his account. Without a body, investigators were unable to apply further pressure. At that stage, there was no definitive way to prove that Erin was dead. As a result, after 9 hours without enough evidence to formally charge him, the authorities were forced to release Christopher. The police remained convinced that the account given by the primary suspect was highly strange and unrealistic. Later, when a detective spoke with Nicole, they observed her unwillingness to cooperate, almost as though she harbored resentment toward the investigation. Christopher was eventually released from the Marine Corps, and as originally planned, he and his wife packed their belongings, loaded their truck, and, together with young Liberty, returned to Alaska. Meanwhile, the police faced their second and more formidable task, finding Erin's remains and proving that this was not simply a case of a sudden disappearance. The investigation appeared to lose momentum, leaving detectives discouraged. That changed when Isabel recalled that, a week before Erin vanished, Christopher had mentioned visiting the national park with a friend to explore mines, referring to one that no one would ever locate. Determined to pursue this lead, investigators enlisted the assistance of a local specialist who was knowledgeable about the many scattered mines across the area. With guidance from this expert, investigators and volunteers in California launched a careful and systematic search for Erin throughout the park. They searched 3,000 square kilometers of wilderness, with 6 separate law enforcement agencies eventually taking part. Despite weeks of searching, however, there were no favorable outcomes, leading to the painful decision to halt the operation on Saturday, August 16, 2014. Yet, in an unexpected turn of events that same day, a spelunker detected a strong odor of gasoline emanating from one of the mines. In the final hours of that day, volunteers lowered a bucket equipped with a camera into the mine. At a depth of 9 meters, the oxygen levels inside the shaft were toxic, and farther down, around 30 meters, they spotted what appeared to be a body. After an immense effort late that Saturday night in August, the body was recovered 2 months after Erin's disappearance. A propane tank was also discovered at the bottom of the mine, believed to have been part of a failed attempt to destroy the victim's remains. The body was airlifted to the local morgue, where, due to severe decomposition, dental records were used to confirm identification. It was determined to be Erin, who had died from asphyxiation caused by an object still tightly wrapped around her neck. It was also revealed that she had been pregnant. The horrifying revelation that Erin and her unborn child had been killed sent her family through an emotional whirlwind. Although it was the worst news imaginable, for her mother at least, it was easier to bear than the continued agony of not knowing where her daughter was. For the moment, her only wish was that Erin's body be returned to Tennessee for a proper burial. With Christopher possessing the motive, means, and opportunity, and evidence steadily accumulating against him, he was soon arrested by a police officer in Anchorage, and his vehicle was seized. Inside the car, beneath the passenger seat, authorities discovered a homemade object resembling the one found around Erin's neck. This discovery prompted police to question Christopher's mother. While she claimed to know nothing about the object and said she had never seen it before, a later search of her home uncovered a magazine issue containing an article about Erin's case. Following Christopher's arrest, the case drew national media attention. Soon after, San Bernardino police held a press conference to share details of the investigation, identifying Christopher as the primary suspect. They also searched Isabel's ranch, much to her astonishment, where they located and confiscated a rifle belonging to Christopher. Further worsening his position, investigators uncovered incriminating internet search histories linked to him. As a result, Christopher was charged with first-degree murder. On Friday, September 19, 2014, hundreds of candles glowed in silent tribute to Erin and her unborn child, whose lives had been taken too soon. Roughly 250 people attended the vigil, many wearing custom t-shirts bearing Erin's name on the front and a Bible verse on the back. During this period, Jonathan agreed to speak to only one media outlet despite many requesting interviews. In that interview, he expressed his hatred for Christopher's actions, but explained that holding on to hatred every time he saw him would ultimately consume him. Jonathan revealed that he had learned the affair had resumed and that his wife disappeared when she went to meet Christopher, who was still his next-door neighbor. A part of him wanted to confront Christopher with violence, but he chose not to, believing it would make him no better than Christopher himself. Jonathan did not want to become a bad person. The legal pursuit of justice for Erin Corwin began 2 years later, in October 2016. From the very beginning of Christopher's trial, the prosecution readily demonstrated his tendency toward violence, as well as his motive and opportunity to commit the crime. On Wednesday, October 19th, a forensic scientist testified that a .22 caliber shell casing was found near the mine where Erin's body had been recovered, and that the firing pin marks on the casing matched Christopher's firearm. When the defense presented its case, Christopher was called as the only witness. He took the witness stand and, while acknowledging all of the evidence presented against him, admitted to killing Erin. However, he then put forward a version of events that was clearly not only untrue but also born of desperation. He alleged that he had suspected Erin of abusing his daughter while she was caring for her, which he claimed led to a so-called revelation on that fatal Saturday in the desert. Based on this account, Christopher believed he had sufficient justification for his actions, plainly hoping that his grotesque story would lead to a reduced sentence. Throughout the trial, he displayed an attitude of cooperation and composure. Nevertheless, the jury did not believe any part of his testimony. After only 15 minutes of deliberation, Christopher Brandon Lee was convicted of first-degree murder. The following month, he received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. In response to the tragedy, Erin's family, along with several civic organizations, pushed for a petition to the Bureau of Land Management, calling for funding and resources to seal abandoned vertical mine shafts, beginning with the one where Erin Corwin lost her life. Acknowledging the scale of the undertaking and recognizing that some public areas had already been closed, They requested that this specific location be prioritized to prevent similar tragedies from impacting other families. Reflecting on the entire ordeal and the relief that came with reaching a final verdict, Erin's mother admitted that by the conclusion of the sentencing hearing, she felt both emotionally and physically exhausted. She had been bearing an overwhelming burden for more than 2 years, with grief so heavy that she could scarcely walk. Yet, after the verdict and sentencing, she felt a tremendous weight lifted from her shoulders, comparing her emotional reaction to the day she finally adopted Erin. She recalled the years of uncertainty during the adoption process and how all of that stress disappeared the moment she gave Erin her last name, mirroring the relief she felt upon hearing Christopher's sentence. As for Jonathan Corwin, Erin's husband, he chose to protect himself from excessive media attention and was taking steps to rebuild his life following the devastating loss. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.